Do you mind if we do this Leo Panitch thing um, briefly? Because I'd
Yeah,
like to
sure.
clip this. So Leo Panitch is one of the great minds in socialist thought, and I mentioned this after he passed away on this show. I didn't know him personally, but I have seen him speak before, and I know many people who have known him personally and also have been taught by him. Our friend Adam Proctor was one of his students. For example, he's obviously Leo Panitch was Canadian, but spent a lot of his time working on both Canadian politics and labor politics. A really great theorist of parliamentary politics and of a socialist alternative to what had happened, a critic of neoliberalism and of globalization. And he's somebody, I guess, to get to the point, whose insights are really important. And he's somebody who we lost too soon. So I'm going to try my best to find, good clips of his talks for us to be able to watch on the show over the next few weeks. But this one right here, I don't know if you have it ready, Matt. I just want to set it up real quick. This is, I believe, from 2019, so it's very recent. It's a really interesting talk. I'll post it on Twitter after this, because it's going back to that time when we thought Sanders and Corbyn might be on the cusp of something, and now we're on in a different moment. But in particular, one of the things that he highlights in this talk is the move from protest movements to politics as one of the most important shifts that he saw over the last 10 years of left socialist history. Because you have to remember, there was a really dark time in the left when they thought, oh, we don't ever need to come into power. We can just protest. We can make politicians like do what we want. And what you saw from that was just decades in the wilderness. And then also was the disastrous move to, reject class, or at least to not focus on it, which also led to, just complete destabilization of the left socialist movement. But in this talk, he's primarily talking about globalization and the betrayal of the Democrats to the working people of the United States, and also the social democratic parties, and bringing this in. But pay attention at the very end, because he makes a really important point about politics, political parties, and class consciousness, and how they function in composing classes that I want to jump off on after this.
Insofar as after the crisis, social democracy and the Obama-led Democratic Party went back to fostering globalization and financialization, this finally led to the loss of a significant portion of their working class base. In the United States, working class communities, which had unfailingly voted Democrat every election since the 1930s, and voted for Obama in 2008 and 2012, suddenly turned to vote for this political shyster, Donald Trump. And did so because he alone was speaking in terms of the working class, its insecurities, and of course overlaying that with a mendacious, xenophobic, anti-immigrant, racist appeal. And the Democrats, as social democracy in Europe, were largely naked in the face of this, not because they weren't liberals, not because they themselves were inherently racist, precisely because they had abandoned that class base in promoting globalization. The story is well known from one country to another. And it's seen most startlingly, if we go back to what happened after World War I, in the fact that the German and Swedish social democratic parties, the Austrian Social Democratic Party, the great mass working class parties that came out of the formation of working classes from 1880 to 1920, right, are now running at something like 20% or less of the vote. Right? It's an astonishing deformation politically, a very historically significant one, and tragically it has a lot to do with class deformation. It has to do with, just as classes are formed over time, so are they deconstructed over time. especially insofar as that political parties play a role in forming classes, so have they historically undermined class formation.
That's good right there. I really wanted to hammer home that last point that Panitch makes, and I know it's a little bit of a long clip, but that last point that he makes is really crucial, and I think you can't do it without the context beforehand. That political parties play a role in class formation in the sense that a socialist party, or hell, even a social democratic party, or at some points under FDR, there was a class consciousness that came with politics. There was a kind of politics that was, developed through political parties and through activists and through social movements that had people recognize themselves not just as voters who were voting for a particular slate, but members of a political class. What you've seen in the United States in particular, but also all across the world, particularly in Western Europe, but we're also seeing the same things that are happening in India right now, for example, with the rise of this disgusting nationalist politics, is that when you had these left parties, these social democratic parties, right? We can argue about whether, how true it was for the Democratic Party in this country. But when you had those parties reject class as their basis and fill in another signifier, another idea into it, they vacated that space. And that led in large parts to the decomposition of class, not in an actual experience of the fact that there are working people in this country and people who own the means of production, people who are bosses who benefit from this exploitative system, but in the kind of political sense where people recognize fellow workers as members of the same class, members of the same political community. When you lost that composition that came through and was mediated through politics, you enter into the wilderness. And you have from the Democratic Party in the United States just a complete rejection, not only of working class people materially, but also in substance and style, right? What you have instead is, slick lawyers and the urban professionals. And that allows the right wing to step into the class debate. People mistake what Trump did, and I think people mistake what Trump did as being the guy who's doing working class politics. He was doing working class aesthetics, right? He was stepping into the space of people's actual frustration with the society that they're in. And he was playing a role. And what do you do if you're on the right and you want to play the role of creating a community amongst people of different backgrounds, right? You fill in nationalism. And the reason we are seeing this right-wing nationalist movement is because we saw across the globe, but particularly in the imperial core, a complete retreat from class politics from the traditional left parties, right? And I bring this up today. Sorry if this is long-winded, but I bring this up today because there have been a lot of debates about how we're going to get out of this swamp that we are in. How are we going to get out of this moment when we have a neoliberal resurgence and we are going to enter into a Joe Biden presidency, which is going to bring back all of the failed policies and destructive activities of decades of neoliberal retreat and particularly Democratic Party retreat from class politics? How can we confront that? The only way that we can confront that is by building a politics that seeks to recompose class as a political category. And what that means is we don't just we can't just do that with a banner. We can't just do that with a slogan. We have to do this really hard work of making people, one, believe that politics can do something constructive in their life, and two, that they are members of a political class. And you just can't will yourself into that. You actually have to build that through person-to-person communication, through building organizations that are inviting people in. Understanding that the Democratic Party in itself is a rotten husk, right, is just the first part of figuring out a way that we can build a left political movement, a left political party, a workers' party, not a resurgence of the Democratic Party, a workers' party, a workers' movement. The only way that we're going to be able to do that is by recomposing class and understanding the roles that these political parties played in decomposing class, right? No quick answers, but I just think this is an important springboard here to start thinking constructively about this question. And it's something that I think that a lot of people have been feeling very constructively about it. And what I mean by that is feeling pissed and they want to do something about it. But we have to start thinking constructively and strategically about that.